Brewster here with a new episode of Chordplay. This is the Chords of April Wine, and April Wine formed in Nova Scotia, Canada in 1969 and literally erupted in the mid-70s and continued to dominate, Canadian airwaves and American airwaves, throughout the remainder of the 70s all the way up until around 1984. And they disbanded, they reformed somewhere around 1992, and they've continued to be active to this day. And definitely a very influential Canadian rock band, maybe not quite as influential as, say, Rush, but April Wine's up there with Triumph and some of the other great Canadian rock bands. And there's just something really infectious with their music. They've had some lineup and member changes, some slight stylistic changes, but definitely April Wine rocks. So April Wine's had a very interesting band history because they were originally founded by brothers, David Henman, and actually one of their cousins. There were three Henmans originally in April Wine. They continued with the band until around 1973, and then they quit the group, I guess right before they recorded their third album. And then they kind of reformed. And my favorite era of the band is that kind of mid-70s all the way to the early 80s. And you've got Miles Goodwin on vocals and guitar, Brian Greenway on guitar, and also Gary Moffat too. That April Wine, trio of guitarists definitely rocked. The music and chord-based examples in this episode came from 4 different April Wine albums, and one of those songs came from an early album. I think it's the album On Record, and it's actually a cover of an old Hot Chocolate song, like a really cool, funk R&B kind of tune. And then just kind of scattered, tracks and ideas from different albums after that. Definitely there's a lot of Harder Faster from that album. What's that, 1979, I think? Great record for sure. So there's a good assortment, but I am going to get kind of locked on Harder Faster at one point. But anyway, here we go. With the opening, that's the song Roller from the album First Glance, and it's something like this. So I actually spotted some transcriptions online of this song, and I didn't really agree with what I saw, because I saw a lot of this, like this. Like triplets, like that, like 3 notes. And then 3 notes right there. But that doesn't sound like roller to me. I'm literally hearing these rolling arpeggios, so I'm not really hearing triplets, I'm hearing 16th notes in there. And you really have to listen, either with headphones, you can also slow it down. But I'm hearing this. It's a big, pull-off right there. It's 4 notes, D, C sharp, B to A. And then you're doing that low E open to that E octave right there. So it has a weird flow to it, but it definitely kind of rolls like that. I'm hearing that really quick kind of pull off. And then right here too, I'm hearing quick, hammer-ons from the open D, E, F sharp to that A, and then the open A, B, C sharp to E. And it's fast in there, it's just crammed. And that sounds more like it to me than just this. That doesn't sound right. You hear this rolling kind of sound. D power chord to A power chord and start it again. Last time right there, do that pull off and then that E octave and just hang on that E note. And you start bashing out this, classic like E5 power chord riff. The verse starts right there, and he's really just pedaling the low E. You probably saw me like looking at my imaginary watch, during the intro. It goes on forever right there during the verse. You hear that D to A hit, and then you got this little riff here. And then do the first one again. And then just like a little trill there. Right back in the verse again. Roller is a kick-ass song. That song rocks. Next up is I Like to Rock from the album Harder, Faster, and the intro actually is just a low E open, just kind of played over and over and over. So I'm going to loop that with a TC Electronic Ditto looper. It's just a low E like this. And then you hear another guitar and bass like this. So that low E is just endlessly droned over and over. And then the bass and the second guitar are kind of hitting, these implied chords. So you're doing... So right there, it's literally E minor, against that low E. And then just bar the 12th fret there on the D, G, and B string. Sorry, D, G, and B. And that's an implied E minor 7. And then it's just the 7th fret, so it looks like a D over E. You could also relate that to E. That'd be like an E, E11 sus2. And then it's a D power chord, A over C sharp to a B power chord. And then it stops right there. And then you hit a low E, and then you wait, and then you do it again. And then immediately go right back to E, and then that E minor 7. And just end with that A power chord down there. And then the song gets going. But something like this. Next up's the song You Could Have Been a Lady. This came from the album On Record, and this is actually a cover of an old Hot Chocolate song. And Hot Chocolate was a really great but obscure 70s, funk, R&B, and soul group. If you like funk, definitely check out Hot Chocolate. They were jamming. In the song, there's basically two guitars. One guitar is doing this funky, like scratch and sniff, riff on D to C to G to D, like power chords, like this. Really basic, so I'm going to loop that with a TC Electronic Ditto looper, and then the second guitar comes in and starts playing this funky single note riff. And keep in mind, this is in the Hot Chocolate version. April Wine just kind of, adapted it or adopted it. But notice how the riff changes depending on what chord you're playing over, like this. Really basic stuff, but it's really effective. It sounds great. And right there, you're just doing. And with that chord part, it's just jamming, super funky. Next up's the song Say Hello. This came from the album Harder, Faster, and the guitar part's really interesting. It's this kind of palm-muted, funky 3-chord progression. It almost has like a reggae kind of feel to it. And then the bass enters and kind of defines what the guitar is doing. But the guitar part's something like this, like a heavy palm mute. Over and over and over. So that's A major with a heavy, palm mute. And then it's D over A right there. And then think of G over A right there, like that 70s kind of chord, shape, but it's, G over A. And then back to that D over A. And back to A. So it's a 3-chord progression, but it's really interesting the way it's just kind of crammed together. Bass enters, it really kind of helps define what the guitar is doing. So here's that guitar part, and I'm going to mimic the bass on guitar. Something like that. Really interesting song, and it totally sounds like an 80s tune, but keep in mind Harder Faster came out in 1979, so they were kind of pushing that 80s kind of sound in the late 70s. Next up's the song Before the Dawn. This came from the album Harder Faster once again, and this is in a clean guitar part, and we're basically doing this, kind of picking through these chords. So it starts with this giant E5 up here like this. And notice you're playing the low E first, skipping the A, and then playing up and down that chord, and then you're picking up that E on the A string and skipping the low E string the second time like that. Right? Then move down a whole step. That's going to function as a D6 sus2 implied. And just pick straight up and down, but don't play the low E string. Take that, move it down a whole step. That's C major 7 right there. Play the exact same way, and do this 3 times. And move down a half step. That's going to be a B5 right there. And then open up the A string with that open B, and then G to F sharp, like that. And I usually play the B5 like that, open up those strings, and I keep my third and pinky held down like that. That way when I do the G to F sharp, I can just basically take those 2 fingers and scoot right back to E again like that. Next up's the song Tonite. This also came from the Harder Faster album, and this is actually on acoustic guitar, and then an electric guitar chimes in at the end. I'm just going to play all this on electric guitar, but it's something like this. So there's a big, glorified E5 right there. And then you're going to move back like that. And that's an implied E major 7 when you do that. Like this. Like that. And then you're going to move back to this D5. And that's a D7, like a D7 sus4. And then you're going to move back like that. And that's a E6 sus4. So there's E5, E major 7, E7 sus4, and then E6 sus4. And I'm relating all those to that low E open because you can hear that ringing the whole time. And even though that technically, I mean, you could relate this basically to a B major chord, and then, you know, that D6 kind of, and then an A major chord. But that's not what's happening because those, you know, implied chords aren't happening. It's really just all against that sustained E. Like that. And it creates those really dreamy voicings, which I'm a huge fan of that kind of stuff. Guitar just chimes in with that D5 to E5. But check that song out and also play that on acoustic guitar. It sounds huge on acoustic. Alright, last but not least is Just Between You and Me, which is from the album The Nature of the Beast, which is on the wall right there. This is arguably April Wine's most popular or famous song, at least in America. And this is the verse section, and there's an interesting chord curveball in the song, like this. Right there. So it starts with this G, and then a G over B, and then C major right there. Go back to that G, E minor, A minor, and then D major. And then go back to that G, G over B, and then one time on C. Here's the curveball. Now we're going to the flat 6, so now E flat right there. We had E minor earlier, the regular 6, but now the flat 6. And then it's a G over D right there. And then E5 right there. And this little single note. So one more time right there. Classic song for sure, great one. That's going to wrap this episode of Chordplay with the Chords of April Wine. Definitely an overlooked band, especially in the United States. Now in Canada, these guys are legendary. They're huge in Canada. And then they did have hits that crossed over the border in America, and they toured, you know, all over the place for sure. They toured with Rush and a whole bunch of bands back in the day. So definitely it might be one of those groups that's kind of elusive, you know, for younger people out there. Maybe you haven't heard them before, or you've only heard like maybe 1 or 2 songs. But definitely a great band to dive into. Check out some of their albums. There's some rockin' stuff. And check out First Glance. That's kind of an overlooked album, at least in the US. But that's a great April Wine album. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to Tonite Lessons, and I'll be back before you know with more content and material. Thank you.